It's 11 minutes after 8 o'clock into the third hour of Kenya's biggest conversation this morning. Our guest host is Mark Bichachi, and even as we continue with conversations, one that has been taking the country by storm, literally, over the last 6 to 7 months. It's been happening before, but now we're looking at it having increased over time, and that's the issue of femicide. Our guest for the hour is already seated and already here. Dr. Mutuma Rutere is a director at National Crime Research Center, and we're looking at the femicide crisis in Kenya, what the data shows and what we should do about it. There's the issue of 100 million things already being done about it, and when we say 100 million things, that's already in the shillings, and in terms of what counties and representatives may or may not be doing. But now we're looking into the nitty-gritty of it, in terms of exactly what is happening and definitions, and people are saying what exactly is actually going on. We saw some horrible numbers last week. Since January, how many women have been murdered so far? Not those who've taken their own life, not those who were sick in hospital, but those who've actually been murdered. So that's the conversation that we'll be having this morning. Dr. Rutere, good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Karibu sana. We're glad to have you in the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Asante sana.
Hot topic as well. Many questions rising, and we'll go into some of those today. But let's welcome you in real Situation Room style. CT goes to a different African country every week, and he comes back with a bag of proverbs. So he's going to share the one for today. You tell us what you think about it and how you would what that would mean to you.
We are in the United Republic of Tanzania. Tanganyika, Zanzibar, bound together, we have Tanzania. No matter how fast moonlight runs, daylight catches up.
That's a good one.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yes, the sun will always rise, and no matter how fast moonlight moves, daylight always catches up. Mm-hmm. We know that certain things always happen, and we know that daylight will come. And I think it's a positive thing. I interpret it as a positive statement that actually daylight always comes up and lights up.
Indeed.
The world.
That is true.
Yep.
Well, okay. For sure, and one would hope that that would always happen. We've always seen it happen. There's never been a day where the sun decides, okay, well, not today, guys. You know, it's always come. And in one of those dark moments, I think, is where the country currently finds itself, with the numbers of cases of femicide that we've seen rising significantly over the last, 3/4 of a year. Now, the numbers have gotten to a point and the place where at some point the president said, you know what, something has to be done about this. He's put together a task force to deal with those issues. We've seen some movement at the county level with members of parliament and county governors saying, okay, let's do something about this. But let's go back and see if we can get to the genesis, if possible, of this, and say from the position where you sit, overseeing a crime unit, let's start with some definitions, because I think it's necessary to do so. When we hear femicide, one would think that the rudimentary definition would be the killing of a woman or the killing of a female gender. Could you give us definitions as to that and how all of this is then covered?
Thank you. And that's really important, because there have been questions, why are we using the term femicide when we should be talking about homicide, which is basically the intentional killing of a human being by another. So how is femicide different from homicide, the killing of an individual? This term really refers to the intentional killing of females on gender-related grounds. So it is because of the gender-related conditions that the term comes in. Of course, it's not just women who are getting and girls who are getting killed. Men are also getting killed. And when you look at the statistics, actually, and we are getting to that, we'll see how different it is. And why then has there been a focus on women, even though the numbers of women killed might be lower than the numbers of men who are actually killed. Yeah.
Okay, so just for clarity purposes, what we're saying here is that homicide is the killing of a human being.
Yes.
Femicide is the killing of a female.
Yes.
With an intent. And now we are saying that intent lies squarely on these gender-related issues, relationships, sex, things along those lines.
Absolutely, the gender-related factors.
So you cannot actually then deem something to be a femicide until you've looked at the factors that caused the death?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's where it becomes very complicated, because what you have is a lot of reported cases, but you really have to go to the data and actually look at the context, the motives, the relationship between the perpetrator and the victim to understand what were the connections. Then you make a determination, this is gender-related. Not every killing of a female is necessarily gender-related, but we know from data that the majority of the killings of women in homicide are actually gender-related. Globally, about 60% of women are killed on gender-related grounds.
Just riddle me this. When you talk about gender-related grounds, I saw a young man, 29, who was carrying a sack, unfortunately, of his full of parts of his belated wife. A very unfortunate story. In such a case, is that directly gender-based killing based on the fact that that was his wife, or is there another criteria there?
Well, it could be. Sometimes people also lose their minds and they do horrible things. But again, that's what I'm saying. On specific cases, you have to look at it. But when you look at the data over here, because this is not new data, what do we know of the circumstances that most women are killed? They are killed either by spouses or men they have in one kind of relationship with. Now, that's different for men. Men mostly will be killed either because of certain disputes, certain contexts, but often not by people they have in a relationship with. And that's the distinction.
Okay.
This other distinction is that for women, the safest place is where most of them are killed, homes. You can even talk Airbnb, but those Airbnb are usually in a place where with a person they're in a relationship with.
Okay.
So the safest places for women where they should be safe is where they get killed. That's different for men who are killed most often not in their homes.
Okay.
That's a distinction.
I don't know if to say unfortunately, but sadly, there's been, especially in most recent months, that there has been a link that is being made then between the deaths that we see of women without taking into consideration what these gender-related issues might be. You might have been in a tumultuous relationship. There may have been in a financial issue within that relationship. There may have been abuse, many, many things. But we've in some quarters just said, well, these women are being killed because they are women. Can we do that kind of generalization on femicide?
Yes. When the issues are in the arena of public discussion, it's very hard to control and to go into the details. And that's why when it comes to crime, for instance, we talk about moral panics. You can have a story that causes a panic. There are people who are kidnapping people and taking their blood. I remember there was such a story many years ago when we were kids. But even those where there's no evidence, they are important for people who work on crime because they cause fear. And the fear of crime is part of the conditions that we need to address in the society because the fear of crime is also subjective. And no matter what the objective facts are, if I feel afraid that if I step outside the standard, this building, that I will be mugged, even if the figures show otherwise, you still have a problem. So the role of what we do is to look at the data and to try and address both the actual conditions, but also the subjective, where people feel, what people's feelings and perceptions are, because both are important.
Okay, so let's go back to data, because now I'm curious. what is the actual, one, global rate of femicide? And two, what is the rate of femicide in Kenya? And three, has it increased in the recent past?
Thank you. Excellent questions. And this data is always very problematic. So bear that in mind, because data on crime is always problematic.
Why?
For many reasons. First of all, it is not easy to actually make a determination on all the conditions why someone was killed. It could be someone was killed because they had a disagreement, but they also have a relationship. Again, collecting crime data is very difficult. Often we only depend on the police data, which is the most accurate data. Then we know not all cases are reported. Even the figures that you see are not necessarily the actual figures. Why? Someone might be attacked today and they die 4 weeks later, a month later. That statistic will probably be recorded differently from what is being recorded. So the crime data itself is a problem.
Okay.
Globally, we know from the countries that do a very good work of these studies, about 60% is femicide. They are gender-related killings of women. In Kenya, when you look at the data, and again, big caveats because the data is also not very good, but for the years where we have the data, you find that about 7 people are killed daily. Out of those 7, 5 are men, 2 are women per day. When you look again at that data, there probably you could add or reduce the number in terms of where gender was actually at play. So the data is not very good, but it's indicative and to tell us actually we have a problem. But I'm not sure whether that was your third question. We also need to pay attention not just to those ones who are killed. Remember, by the time someone is killed, particularly if they're in a relationship, you have a whole history of violence. So what these killings tell us is we have a big problem of violence and violence against women in the society. Death, the killing, is basically the end point of a continuum, of a line of violence. So the biggest problem, actually, we should even be attacking is a bigger problem of violence in the society before you come to killings.
Okay, just let him finish my question. Is there an increase in femicide in Kenya so that we can go to city? Because I think that's a very important thing to realize. Because you said that you talked about a moral panic. So is Kenya in a moral panic and the statistics don't show it? Or do we have a serious uptake in terms of our ladies being in actual danger?
Or are we just reporting more?
Yes.
Or are we just reporting more?
The honest answer is that we don't know at the moment. We are looking at the data. My own conclusion looking at it is that we have surges. There's a month you may have a surge that increases exponentially, and then we don't know whether that has increased overall. When you look at the data for the whole year, you might realize that we still have the same numbers. But there are some periods where we have spikes. Like during COVID, when you looked at COVID, you saw spikes in certain crimes, killings, and the rest. But when you look at the data for the whole year, then probably the averages. So the honest answer is that we could be getting more reports, or we could be having surges that we still need to actually explain. And we are looking at the data. We're in the process of looking at this data at the moment and actually see have we seen an increase or not.
Most of the deaths reported in this country from Nairobi. Have I got this right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Nairobi is the most populous, I would say even county, in the whole country. Nairobi is predominantly urban. The vast majority of the people who live in Nairobi live in settlements that we like to call informal, but they are essentially slums, low-income dwellings. And they live in close proximity to each other, and in most cases, they don't have even basic amenities, meaning the conditions in which they live are in and of themselves one could argue, an ecosystem that could trigger all manner of negative societal norms. Now, we register those number of deaths. The population in Nairobi is not decreasing, it is increasing. If you look at deaths per county, you will also find that, coincidentally, some of the counties with smaller numbers of people and which are less urbanized also record far less cases of homicides. Okay. You're nodding, which means you're agreeing with me partially. Yes.
Yes, correct.
So, when it comes to the issue of reporting matters that are specific to femicide, could I then conclude that men tend to kill each other more, but whatever reasons they have for killing each other have now turned to killing women? And so you have to ask, what is it that is happening now
Correct.
that is taking that focus away and focusing it on women? What is it?
Correct. The business of killing is predominantly male. So you are correct. Men are the perpetrators of most killings predominantly. And they also kill more men. And even when it comes to the killing of women, it is men. What we know is sometimes periods that you see spikes
Yes.
in the killings
Yes.
is very often coincide with conditions of economic stress, social stress, unstable population movements. You talked about urban areas, places where there's a sense of community, always, very often have less killings.
Yes.
And very interesting when you look at Nairobi, most of the killings you hear are in Eastlands.
Yes.
Kibera is having very few cases, if
Yes.
any at all. So what is it that is different, yet people think about Kibera as the largest slum in Africa and Eastlands? My own hunch, my own analysis
Yes.
is that Kibera has a very strong sense of community. If you walk through Kibera, people know each other. They have lived there for generations. The populations know each other. Eastlands is the populations are less stable. People come, they stay for 1 month, they leave, they're moving. There's no sense of community.
They are more mobile.
They are more mobile.
Yes.
Mobile populations are always associated with more levels of violence and crime. That's why rural areas, where everyone knows each other, have less cases of maybe homicide, and therefore because they have a sense of community. But the point you asked is, what are the conditions that lead to the killings? We know economic stress, constant or sudden population movements contribute to an extent.
You know the...
Okay, sorry.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
No. So, I mean, last week we saw, because now we're going to start talking about, what should be done about it and what is actually being done about it to reduce these numbers, because it is a national conversation, as it ought to be. But last week when we saw the number of women in January, and so today's the 27th, by then we're looking at that, and it was the 24th, 23rd, I believe, and 11 women between the 1st of January and that date had already been murdered.
Yeah.
Now, the trace that was done, I'm not sure by whom, but they could always point to a relational issue, some kind of abuse with themselves and their partner for whatever reason. But we see that one of the biggest issues is that there is sometimes a love triangle, that there's another individual in that, relationship, and that causes some element of discomfort. But like you said, it's not a today, tomorrow thing. It has taken some time and it has festered until the point where taking life seems to now be the last and final thing. So do we see that across board, with those numbers that Mark was talking about, whether they've increased or decreased over time, do we see that the element that would then bring about this, like you talk about economical issues, relational issues, this love triangle story seems to be one that is very prominent, that there always seems to be another person involved, an element of jealousy, an element of something, has matters of the heart now bring about this intimate partner killing that we see?
I think actually most of the intimate partner killings, when you look at most of the cases, are not necessarily love triangles. There are certain cases that fascinate the media or become reported because they have love triangles,
Yes.
certain young women, and they become really the emblematic cases about this. But when you look at it, many women get killed for many reasons. Either they have left the man, they have not given the man, what triggers is they have not given the man the money that he wanted. There are the relational issues, there are triggers, different triggers. And love triangles in some cases is one of them, but it's not the majority of the cases. And that's a problem because when you look at the killings, they are not only just young women. The killings of those who are, the ages of those who are killed will range from very teenage to all the way sometimes up to 80. Yes. I know there are some cases of a woman who is almost 90 who was killed recently. So you can see that it defies the age group or the economic status of these women.
We're going to take a break, but then I just wanted to ask before we do that, so then why are they so brutal? So brutal in nature that we see, for example, just one of them, worried that his girlfriend would, take off or whatever. And these are words that he spoke afterwards. And he took an axe to her, Or, we rarely see where somebody has, been given a pill to swallow, for example. Somebody's taken a knife to them, taken an axe to them, butchered them, cut off, and it's terrible, traumatic to discuss, but this is exactly what is happening. So why so brutal in the nature of crimes and understanding why that would happen? Why do they take such a brutal way?
Because they are relational. And again, there is also, we have to talk about the norms and what is accepted. What do men think about the women who are about to leave them? There are some who say, if I can't have you, no one will have you. There are those issues that sometimes come into play. And when it's relational, it becomes even more brutal. The killings of stranger and stranger are less brutal, as we know. Because there was the very tragic case of the man who was killed in front of his 3-year-old recently by strangers. But we know, you are right, most of the relational killings are more brutal because there's passion involved. And that's what makes it horrifying, as we've seen in the various cases in Nairobi and the rest of the parts of the country.
Want to understand. Dr. Rutere is our guest this hour, and we're looking at the rising cases of femicide in the country. Taking a break and then coming back and looking at ways in which this can be handled. What is being done and why are these the approaches that should be taken? It's 26 minutes to 9 o'clock. We'll take a quick break and take a look at weather and traffic. We'll be back to continue with this after that.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day. The weather with Spice FM.
People come to me and they say they get discomfort when they have ice cream. Can you imagine that? Avoiding having cold ice cream. Sensodyne gives you long-lasting protections against sensitivity. And people come in and they're like, oh, it works. I can have ice cream and I'm not in any discomfort. I recommend Sensodyne because it works. It's brilliant.
Dreaming of shopping online from the biggest stores in the US and Europe? Now, it's easier than ever to get those items delivered to Kenya. Shop your favorite brands on websites like Amazon, eBay, and Zara. Then sit back and relax. We'll deliver right to your doorstep in Kenya. Rapid Courier has partnered with Standard Courier to enable you to shop globally and get your purchases delivered locally anywhere in Kenya. Our fast and reliable delivery service ensures your items arrive safely right to your door. Sign up today and start shopping online from the US and Europe. With delivery to Kenya made easy. Shop global. Delivered to Kenya. Sign up today on rapidgroup.com and start shopping globally.
I want my family to remain intact.
The Fierro dynasty faces turmoil following the mysterious disappearance of a house help years ago. Now, 4 relatives disguise themselves as servants, seeking revenge and answers.
I promised this, Teresa.
Will their plan succeed, or will they be exposed and vanish too? Catch Dirty Linen every Monday to Friday at 6 p.m. and unravel the mystery. Drama, fun, and laughter. Come alive every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m.
I am not a woman.
Join us at Hullabaloo Estate to discover the true meaning of love thy neighbor. Or maybe not.
Papa Francis, Papa Colimo, na Papa Male, Lema Bro.
Step into Njoro's world every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. while he navigates life in Nairobi as an educated taxi driver.
New week, new deals, only on shop.digger.
Convenient and reliable shopping is just a click away on www.shop.digger. Join Yolanda Mulwa every Saturday at 6:30 p.m. as she showcases new arrivals and exclusive discounts.
Who doesn't want to have fun shopping while saving money?
Only on KTN.
In fact, 5 years ago, we didn't have the problems we're talking about right now. So what is it that you could say is a common thread that traverses every area that you hear of? Men killing men, that one we take it as a norm. Yes,
sadly so.
Bizarre as it is, we take it as a norm. But this targeted focus on women, young women, middle-aged women, old women, what would you say is the common thread that seems to traverse all these tragic stories that we hear of these deaths?
Well, thank you. I think we also need to look at the broader problem of violence. The killing of women is not it's actually also connected with the bigger problem of violence in the society. Mm-hmm. It's not in isolation. The Kenyan society has also become more violent. When you look at the violent crimes in the country, they have also been increasing over time. So this is also part of it. We have an increasing problem of gangs, young people, youngsters, some as young as 10 in places like Mombasa, who are basically around and killing people. So my argument is that if we want to address this, it's not in isolation from other problems of violence in the society. It's all linked. The problem of economic stresses, the problem of drugs, alcohol, which are also affecting the fabric of the society itself. All of these are actually one way or the other linked to the problem of violence in general and the problem of violence against women. So it's a bigger problem that needs to be addressed.
Are you saying that Kenyans are stressed and that they have poor coping mechanisms to the stress? In fact, let me make it better. Is Kenya a depressed country, and is violence how we are reacting to it instead of seeking help?
I have no professional training on that to make that determination of stress. But what I know is that there are certain conditions that lead to violence. Stark inequalities. Do you know the most violent countries in the world? South Africa,
Yes.
Brazil, top always. Look at the economic structures of those countries.
Yes.
They have the countries with the starkest inequality.
The richest people with the poorest people.
Precisely.
Oh, yeah, the rich are so rich.
Precisely.
They set new records for wealth.
Yeah. Precisely.
The poor
are very poor. Yes. They set new records for
poverty.
Yes.
Speaking of which, just to show the stark difference, I once went to Umklanga in Durban, and we literally drove about 10 minutes. And Umklanga is amazing. It's got the Range Rovers, the Ferraris. City 10 minutes out of that place. 10. Mud, dead broke slums.
Mud,
matope.
That's a bit stark, isn't it?
It is shockingly stark.
And so what we know, people talk about poverty. Poverty doesn't necessarily lead to violent crime. You can actually have a very largely poor community, but not necessarily crime. But the one correlation that we see from data and or experts will tell you is that inequality is positively correlated to violent crime.
Okay.
So not poverty.
So are we saying that inequality, because obviously inequality, there's some part of that spectrum where folks are all right, wealthy, and the other side is that those who unfortunately are poor. Now, are we saying that the perpetrators of this violent crime, more often than not, will come from the poor side of the spectrum?
Well, violent crime is largely is actually mostly correlated with the poorest. But gender violence, gender-based violence defies
absolutely
all the economic status.
Yes.
So that's the other bit that is very, very important to bear in mind. The violence against women cuts across all socioeconomic classes. But the crime, the ordinary property crime, physical crime, you'll find the most, it's basically people who are largely poor.
Okay.
And there's a reason why urban areas become very important when you're talking about violent crime. Why? Because urban areas, extreme inequalities coexist with extreme wealth. The person who is extremely poor walks across and interacts every day with a person who is extremely wealthy.
And if you
that
find
creates some friction in the society that we need to think about.
I would imagine, and that's why that even in community, when you find a specifically affluent part, not too far from that, is that you will find a slum.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's an economic fact, but also remember that what ties this thing and brings about that friction that you speak of is when there is no hope. If there are wealthy people and there's a clear path and you know that if I take said yes, I can also. So you aspire.
Yes.
But when you accompany this with a sense of hopelessness,
desperation.
Because if you look at the stats in Kenya, okay, I have been sent some details here by a friend of ours, a lady by the name of Patricia Ndago. This is Africa Data Hub. They say this: most of the women who, the year 2024 was the worst when it comes to reporting such cases.
Yeah.
Worst possible, okay? The women who were targeted the most, around 70% were women between the age of 18 and 35, okay? And many of these, again, 70% were partner-related. Now, the group of men who perpetrated this crime, again, it's that same age group. 66% of these perpetrators were aged between 18 and 35. So we actually know where
the problem
is.
Yes. What is it about this age bracket that gets them so riled up that they are able to lash out and commit these atrocious crimes?
Question: are these the ones we call Gen Z?
They are the ones we call Gen Z.
It's the reason I'm asking. Continue.
Yeah, it's the same demographic. I mean, youth, most of the crimes will fall within that demographic. There are a few people you find in the prison who are older, but that demographic that they are talking about is exactly the one that actually commits most crimes. And that's where we need to think about interventions. And I'm glad you're talking about hope, because we need to think of, so where do we intervene and how do we intervene? Very often everyone is thinking police. And we say police are not doing a good job. But in most of these places the solution is not necessarily police. It's other interventions. You talked about hope. You talked about exit from situations of abuse and violence. How can such women exit? By the time a woman many times comes to be killed, particularly the ones in a stable relationship or a long marriage relationship, they will have had many cases of violence against them. So what are the exit points for them?
So that's interesting that you say.
Look, if I may, there's a dance. It's called Mapangale. I don't know whether you've seen it.
I've seen it.
I find it very disturbing.
It's a dance.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
So basically, someone dances. There are two people dancing. One is acting like he's chopping the other heads. One's head off. The other one
He's
is
pretending like
moving
the
his
head
head.
has been chopped off.
It's a dance.
Yes,
It's a dance.
yes.
It's a dance.
And where do people dance this dance?
In clubs.
Yeah.
In fact, I saw it in church too.
Yeah, exactly. It is.
So now, for me,
You church.
yes, I
Yes.
saw it in a church service.
I have to avoid that church you go to.
Unfortunately, I don't know which one it was. So now, the reason why I bring this up is during the Gen Z riot, and I was very keen on it, there was a lady carrying a placard saying, "I'm already suicidal, so you killing me does not scare me." I am relating it with many stories that you've said that if I can't have you, no one can have you. And you talked about a moral panic. And moral panic is when people panic about a certain thing over happening in their society. But could we be looking not only at hopelessness, not only at increased drug use and what is it, we saw it in the headlines, bars near schools, but we're talking about a generation that has been politically ignored, has not been given the capacity to deal with their psychological traumas. They do not have hope about their futures, and they simply don't have the shock absorbers to absorb shocks. Is that what we are seeing them express even in their dance moves when they're talking about Mapangale?
I think all those factor into this big problem. And the problem of violence and crime is always a good way of discussing what is happening in the society, because violence is always a symptom of all other structural problems in the society. And good science shows us there's no single explanation for a complex phenomena like this. So all those fits in, and therefore any interventions you have to think about must accept this complexity of possible reasons why we are having this kind of responses, from schools to the problem of drugs, to the problem of socialization, to what is happening within families. All of them are part of these drivers of this complex problem of violence.
Let me ask. There is a little matter of what you call organ trafficking. Does it feature?
We have heard about that problem. It could be, but I would say that it is not a significant problem within this problem of femicide. Getting organs from an individual requires some bit of sophistication.
You need knowledge.
You need knowledge. You need certain equipment. A lot of the killings we are seeing may not necessarily point that. That's not to say they may not be, but this is not a new problem. The problem of violence against women, we know quite a bit about it to know that even without the unending complexity of something like organ trafficking, it's been part of the society.
You know, gender-based violence, especially when it's targeted against women, has been considered a norm even in African societies. Wife beating was considered wife disciplining, okay? It was something that many men considered normal. One didn't hear of deaths. One also didn't hear of serious injury, okay? Not to say it was good. I'm simply saying that it existed. But behind the beating and the so-called discipline was a certain thought process. And that thought process demeaned the position of women in relationships. And because of this, then it then made it okay for them to be treated badly, for them to be beaten.
Until the point whereby a number of them felt that if they were not beaten, that they were not loved.
To be honest with you, I was once at a gender violence conference. And one of the ladies who was invited, after listening to people talking badly against gender violence, she lifted up her hand. And this is not a third-hand story. I was there live. And she said, "How will I know my husband loves me unless he beats me.
Okay.
And the hall went quiet. But what City is saying is serious. Because I have said before, we live in a society where we say we are progressive. But if Ndu is to get married, she will not be part of the dowry negotiations because that's a man-only affair.
And it is me they want to marry.
You see, so I think what City is asking, is there a problem in our original societal thought that is influencing and informing the gender and femicide specifically?
But I have to ask the question, and I think that sometimes we link between what happened historically. CT gives examples here many times. Men used to marry multiple women.
Yeah.
Did we hear that, whether those relational issues, did you hear that a man was beating a woman to within an inch of her life or taking her life? Did we hear that? So the original has seemed, we seem to have digressed significantly from what was happening before.
Yes.
Now, and this is one of the questions that I wanted to bring in. All of the things we mentioned here have direct pointers to mental health and its stability. And for me, one of the things that we must address is that mental health issue. Because what happens that you can deviate so far from the norm to take someone's life? You're a crime expert, sir. You know that to take another life is not easy. It is, it is a difficult thing to take life with a weapon, with your hands, whatever it is. It's hard. But you get to the point where you have deviated so far from the norm that it is the only option for you to take at that point. And for me, when you talk about interventions, which I think we must look at now, albeit briefly, when we talk about interventions of what to be done, for me, it is not 100 million shillings to go to counties to put up tents and banners and say, stop gender violence. Yes, we have desks at police posts, which you mentioned, but it is the same places where we've heard the famous cases of a woman who went to report a rape at a police station and then was assaulted, allegedly, by a police officer. We have just a few weeks ago been told of young women who have gone to the police station, and if it's going to be vulgar, I apologize in advance, but what do the police officers say? Utapea susu, kwanza. We talk about it. It's important for us to say it. So what are the interventions that we ought to look at? Looking at other statistics. Only 16% of females in an abusive relationship will actually walk away. That is ridiculously low. 84% of women who are abused on a daily will remain there to either continue in that abuse or to meet their death. So isn't that what we should be targeting? The individuals. Through programming.
Thank you very much. Very, very important, because I talked about exits from this highway of death. What kind of exit is we providing? If a woman wants to leave, where are they going? First of all, in the short term, are there safe houses? Are there social workers from the county government, from the local level? I tell you, the local chief knows which man beats the wife or which wife beats the man, whichever is the case. But what are the social interventions at that level? If that woman wants to leave, where do they go? They have children. If she left, what will happen to the children? So sometimes they opt to stay and end up dead. So you need to think of the exits. But you need to think about this holistically. You need to look at it as a better understanding of the reason why women are getting killed. It needs to be driven by evidence. It needs to be driven by data so that you understand, for instance, the first responders, law enforcement officials and the rest, for instance, need better training, need better supervision of how they are actually handling them. In the hospitals, what is the interlinkage between the hospitals and the other programs to provide support? And you see the health people in the health centers will tell you everything that you need to know about this violence because they see them, they treat them, and then they go home. So those connections, the fact that we don't have comprehensive programs across the country that are actually addressing the problem of violence is part of where we actually need to intervene. And this cannot only be done by government. It has to be done by various actors. Government is very good at steering and coordinating. But you have to have churches, you have to have mosques, you have to have community groups that can do, some of them do a better job than any other actors. You need to give them support so that they provide this kind of service. But also we need this kind of conversations. Remember when HIV/AIDS came, there were conversations around the country, in schools, in hospitals, in churches. We need to have conversations with our men and young men and boys and men in their men groups to have a conversation. The same way they had conversation about AIDS, HIV/AIDS. What is happening to the men?
You know, Dr. the two things. One, according to data that we have, that Mapangale dance, once it became commonplace, the hacking of women went up by 6%. We're talking about the power of example. You see, where the power of example has always been strongest is in a family unit or the collective community unit. Now, that has broken down.
True.
Yep.
The government can't do this job.
No.
It actually can't.
In fact, CT, do you know how many police officers we have? 110,000.
110?
Yes.
To police 55 million people?
Yes.
Okay. How's that going to happen? They can't. We dropped the ball somewhere. Something is broken in this society of ours, and it's actually broken badly.
Doc, can I ask you, because we just have 2 minutes to go, but can I ask you, from a I don't know, do you say from a crime perspective or from a criminal perspective? You're not a criminal, so you wouldn't know. From that perspective,
yes.
What is the likelihood that as a criminal or somebody who would perpetrate this crime, if they saw a placard or if they saw a tent erected somewhere in the county or they saw posters, what is the likelihood that they would stop abusing this woman or not kill this woman because they saw that tent and people are talking in barazas? What's the likelihood?
They won't. The criminals, they know that you're not supposed to steal or kill, but they continue to steal and kill. So it is awareness and conversations should not be targeted at criminals. It is targeted at the rest of the society that generates these conditions. It is to address the infrastructure of ideas that it's okay to kill the woman because I can't have it. It's those conversations. That's where the conversations need to be, not the criminals. The criminals are either people who are psychologically damaged or people who basically need other forms of intervention by law enforcement or medical practitioners. That's not where that conversation is. That's for the rest of the society. It's at the school, at the church, at the community level.
And that's where it needs to push. What should we see in the next coming, days, weeks? In my opinion, 100 million shillings has already been wasted in terms of what should be done. But what should we see?
I think, one, it's very good that we have a task force in place. I think that's very good because it recognizes a complex problem. The next step after that, hopefully, is to set up a very, very comprehensive data-driven program that it relies on expertise to say, this is where we need intervention. This is where we need resources. Sometimes you don't need resources to fix problems. Sometimes all you need is to attitude change.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's just to see whether so-and-so is doing their job. Sometimes it's basically to change how young people respond to content. Remember, we now have a very networked society in terms of technology. Technology is now an accelerator to some of these problems. We need to also see harnessing of the potential of technology and not only see the technology as a problem because we can't do anything about it largely. How do we harness the technology so that that technology becomes the tool for helping women?
Indeed. Dr. Mutuma Rutere is the director of the National Crime Research Center. Thank you for this morning. And it's our hope that we continue to have such conversations and to push these initiatives to see these numbers go down and be eliminated. Thank you for being in the hot seat of the Situation Room this morning. Hope to continue those conversations again in the future.
Thank you for having me.
Asante. Good morning. It's 9 a.m.
to become the next biggest music star? Do you have what it takes to compete with the best of the best?